All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting for October 3rd, 2023. This is our earlier meeting time, which means we're open to different time zones than usual. So hopefully we have a few different people here this time around. If anyone is new to the group or just wants to introduce themselves, we've got plenty of time on the agenda, so feel free to take this opportunity to give a brief intro, what brings you here, what interests you in Gateway API, or also feel free to add anything to the agenda. Cool. Okay. So I'll just keep on moving then. This is, I think, going to be really light. First
You
up,
keep saying that
there's
you're gonna jinx it sometime.
I know I've jinxed it before, but I've got a feeling this time, but we'll see. There's a, I don't know how I can do this, but there's a logo poll. If I click on it, it's just going to show that I voted. Hopefully everyone else, if you click on it, you're going to see a thing like this too. Spoiler, there's 4 logo options that are currently present. I'm not going to say that any of them are perfect, but my own opinion is that it will be nice to have some kind of logo for Gateway API. So right now we're saying that we'd like to have votes in by the end of Sunday. So basically a week from now. And yeah, I think that's all on the logo.
I've said this in chat or in Slack, but I would strongly vote for a none of the above option on those as well, and just continue using the Kubernetes logo for the moment, because logo design is very hard. And I think it would be a really good idea to try to get some folks involved who are good at logo design.
Yeah,
With all due respect to whoever drew those logos, right? I was stepping on somebody for a second there. Who is that talking?
Isn't the logo creator the one that made the Kubernetes logo of one of them? Tim? I could be completely wrong. And the point still is perfectly valid, even if that's true. But
no,
you are entirely correct that at least one of the logo options was created by Tim, who created the original Kubernetes logo. So yeah, I would say that my own perspective on it is that there are many people who specialize in branding, logo design, etc. I am not one of them by any stretch of the imagination. But I would say, in retrospect, I think even the Kubernetes logo probably looks kind of silly, but it's gone so far and become and just has,
the Kubernetes logo has the serious advantage that it was the first mover, right? So the only thing the Kubernetes logo actually needed to do was be something that you could recognize. Now we need something that you can recognize that is also distinct from the Kubernetes logo. And that's actually harder, right?
The question is, how distinct does it need to be from the Kubernetes logo?
Well, if it's not distinct, you may as well use the Kubernetes logo. And if you want it to be distinct, it needs to be distinct. And I realize that's
I think
tautological, right?
See, I think everyone has a different opinion here. Mine is that I think there's some beauty in a subtly different. This is Kubernetes, but there's some nuance here, right? This is Kubernetes for traffic, right? This is Kubernetes for routing, whatever. I don't know. I definitely will buy what some have said, that most of the options are going to be indistinguishable if you're looking at them at favicon size up in your tab or browser or wherever. Yep. I don't necessarily consider that a bad thing, but definitely up to your own opinion.
It's kind of the thing where if you're hanging pictures and you can't get them exactly lined up perfectly, you need to make it very clear that you didn't intend for them to be lined up perfectly. or everyone will wonder if you just were trying for something and missed, right? So that's part of where I'm coming from. But I don't feel the need to burn any more time on this one. I just think we should have had a maybe something else option in that poll.
Yeah, that's fair. I think at this point we just want to have a logo, but I can see your argument for a none of the above option. But I'd hate to go forever without having something. Personal preference.
I would certainly agree that forever is too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is that we're phasing. Oh, I should say one last thing, right? Based on all that discussion, there are two options that are neck and neck right now. Surprising amount of votes already in, but I would say every vote matters. If I don't want to overcommit, but I may, for Flynn's sake, add a none of the above option just so that we can represent every viewpoint. But do want to get those votes in this week. Cool.
I mean, if you add that, it might just get one vote, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it, for the sake of completeness, that would make sense. Cool. Next up, this is really just a natural follow-up from time flies, I guess, but I originally brought this up in Gateway API, SIG Network, etc. in January, and we're all the way in October, which is, wow, time is just flying by.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I know. There's been some good reviews on this already, but this is something that has such a long-term impact on the API that I'm hoping to get as many approvals as possible so that, a year from now when people ask, why is there no beta? I can say, well, you checked the box, you approved the thing that said there would be no beta. So, this is a novel new thing in Kubernetes. I just want to make sure we're all on board. There's a doc that I linked to here, but I think it was Mattia who suggested that I actually add a rationale in the versioning guide. And so I thought I would take some time to highlight why I think we should be doing this. In most cases, I think there's effectively two levels of API stability. APIs that are installed and available by default, and other ones that you opt into and are by extension alpha or experimental. It's really not obvious to me, at least, what value that intermediate state is. In upstream Kubernetes, they're moving beta to opt-in, which in my opinion means that alpha has almost no value. If you whatever. Then the further we separate stable and experimental APIs, the longer it takes to get meaningful feedback on new features. And then finally, as all implementers here will probably agree with, every unique API version we add comes with significant cost for users, implementers, and maintainers. If you've ever tried to guide someone through upgrading to a new API version or tried to decide which API version you were going to use to read or write from, it's a real pain. So having less of those migrations, I think, is going to be a net positive for the community. That's the rationale anyways. We've already gotten some good approvals here, but would like to get as much feedback on this one as possible. So everyone's perspective is covered here. Yeah. Any questions or comments on that one? All right. Next up, this is just an absolute monster of a PR, and I've already left around 40 comments on it, and Nick has already responded to around 40 comments on it. So it's a monster, but I would really, really appreciate some review from others on this. The big thing that this does is, usually I would say this is too big of a PR to like have all as one thing, but you know, I know how we got to this point. The policy that we want to graduate needs this extension to attach to policy status. They were both backed up against each other, and you know, we had enough discussion that we knew what it should look like, and the gap had already been approved, and so hopefully it makes sense to combine these. But that means I really, really want to see some additional reviews beyond just myself and Nick by extension as author of this. This means if you are invested in the policy ecosystem at all, it affects you because we're changing how status works. This is, or we're proposing changing how status works with the idea that every policy should have a ancestor reference. Terminology could be helped here. I'm not sure that ancestor reference is the right term here, but the idea is that you're trying to distinguish, this is the resource that determines what is effective here. So if you have a service that, you know, connects to 3 different gateways, you'll have 3 different entries in policy status for each of those gateways. Similarly, controller name, this whole structure is going to look very similar to route status, so it shouldn't be very surprising. It's just a new thing for policy. And then finally, just the conditions that you'd expect. So I hope there's no surprises here, but again, would appreciate some others taking a look at this to make sure I haven't missed anything, Nick hasn't missed anything. It's a pretty big PR, and we are trying to get it in this week. Any comments, questions, concerns on this one?
Is it just me, or does this seem like it is adding more complexity to the already complex policy situation? And sorry, let me preface that with, I kept looking at the headline of this as email came across the transom and went, oh yeah, I should read about back in TLS policy. But I did not catch that it had this additional policy thing in it, and I apologize for that.
Yeah.
So thank you for the call out. I appreciate that.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, the GEP 713. Yeah, this really does undersell the contents of the PR. Maybe I should update that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I get where you're saying. I think this is really the first time we've run into this as explicitly. That so far, I'd say most policies have been single tenant. And so when you have a policy, it is likely going to have a single effect. But I'd say that's even not necessarily true in GKE, for example, using an implementation I'm familiar with. We have many gateway classes with different capabilities. And so the effect of our policy may be different depending on the gateway or set of gateway it's applied in the context of. So if you have, again, 3 different gateways all by the same underlying controller, the underlying load balancer or whatever that it's programming may have different capabilities. So in my opinion, I don't think this is necessarily complicating the model so much as just reflecting that this is something that exists, right? This is a possibility that you're going to have different results depending on what gateway something is tied to, and providing a standard way to configure that. And I'd say the same thing could be true. Let's say that a controller implements a policy both in mesh and for ingress, so attached to a gateway. You'd probably also be able to use this for that. It is So in my opinion, I don't think it's new complexity as much as a way of expressing a situation that already exists.
Yeah, I'm generally a fan, as you know, of trying to be clear about what policies are affecting what. So the potential for adding clarity is definitely nice here. So I will go off and read this one much more carefully.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that Nick, I think has, said pretty clearly in 7.13 is, I can't find the right reference at this moment, is basically that GAP 7.13 is not something that we can force anyone to use, right? It is a pattern that we recommend. With that said, we expect that there's going to be gateway API tooling, gateway cuddle, etc., that expect this pattern to exist. And if you want to benefit from the tooling, then you should follow this pattern. And having this specific kind of ancestor status is something that can help. Gateway cuddle already tries to explain the effective policy for a given resource. This can help make that more clear, as opposed to it guessing, well, this is accepted somewhere, so it must be accepted everywhere. This is one thing that can help that be just a little bit more clear, I think. Yes, and Mike is asking if this is explained in more detail in the GAP. NSPR adds a pretty sizable chunk to GAP 7.13 for this. So as I kind of alluded to, this is a monster of a PR. So please take a look as soon as you have some time.
One other thing that's maybe worth mentioning, although I emphatically do not want to derail this call with lots and lots of in-depth discussion of this, but I would like to make folks aware that it is going on, is that there are a couple of projects where there are a couple of projects that are needing to try to deal with timeouts, with retries in HTTP routes in much the same way, kind of getting back to that from the original. Let's see, 742 was originally timeouts and retries. We split that up. There are a couple of projects that are needing to deal with that. And at least in the case of Linkerd and Envoy Gateway, it looks like that's being primarily examined in the context of HTTP route extension filters rather than policy attachment, partly as a reaction to the complexity of policy attachment. And so that's something that I want to call out as a thing that's happening that will likely happen more. I'm not, John says, I really don't like filters and policies, both existing concurrently. It's a really interesting situation and might be worth some, I don't know, further thought or something. Because yeah, you do get into some really interesting situations if you've got both and things like that.
Yeah, no, I will be the first to say that I think the filter model wherever it's available, which right now is only on route, where you point out to extensions, is going to be easier to follow for many cases. Policy is definitely more flexible in that it can target everything, including things that aren't controlled by Gateway API. We all know just how painful it is to try and, change every Kubernetes resource ever existing and say, you can point out from here and extend it. That would be a dream, but it is, I think a long ways away. So yeah, I actually understand why people would be extending route in the way that they are with filters. I don't really have a problem with that, but John, I'm interested if your comment of not liking filters and policies, do you mean you don't want them to do the same thing, or you just think that having both available are...
I mean, it just, there's two ways to do the same thing, and so you end up with weird states. Like in isolation, they both make perfect sense. Like filters, we use them for core stuff, and it's great there. And so then having an extension point is logical. But like we've seen cases where someone wanted to make a policy that can apply to a route rule, a route, or a gateway. And so their solution was to make a policy and a filter. Like that sucks. There's two CRDs to represent one niche case, and it's all kind of wonky. But even without doing that, it's like I have to choose for everything. Should it be a policy or should it be a filter? And for a user, they need to understand, am I using this as a policy or am I using it as a filter? And they apply to the same exact thing potentially. So it's always just felt a little bit wonky to me. I don't really have a concrete suggestion unless we want to kill filters, which is probably a big change. That's one of the things in the API that's made me feel a little uneasy.
Yeah, no, that's entirely fair. And I think I've seen a similar conversation, maybe the same one, about trying to use both policy and filter for similar things. And it's
really easy
messy
to come up. Yeah, it's really easy to come up with a CRD that makes perfect sense as a thing attached to a gateway with GEP 713 and as a thing referred to as a filter from an HTTP route. And
yeah,
that's a surreal situation, particularly because you get to ask questions like, well, what happens if you have both? What happens if you decide to attach, what happens if you decide to attach this object to a route using GEP 713, but that route also refers to a different instance of the same object as an extension ref? And you actually have to deal with that, right? But at the same time, GEP 713, picking on the concrete example of retries, I don't think it makes sense to use GEP 713 policy attachment for retries. I feel like that's a little too core to the experience of managing traffic, managing north-south traffic, or east-west traffic for that matter, in much the same way that we ended up deciding that timeouts probably didn't belong as a thing that needed to be attached as a policy attachment, right? It's, I'm kind of in the same situation as John here, right? Where it's not like I have any concrete great suggestions for what we should do about this, but I wanted to make sure that we at least brought up the fact that, hey, this is a thing that's going on right now. We should expect to see probably more of this stuff.
I think if we could summarize what's being said here, it's that policy attachment is a necessary evil in the sense that we can't change every Kubernetes resource everywhere. So we need a model to extend resources that we can't change immediately, right? At the same time, we think that filters are a easier pattern for extending resources. So where they exist, they are used. Having both available at the same time is very confusing. I don't have a solution, but
I guess the only vaguely concrete thing is, I suppose we might at some point try to come up with recommendations for people who want to maybe experiment using a filter for something that they're then going to try to do a GEP for to bring into the core HTTP route objects, or some sort of recommendations for that path might be helpful. If there are really recommendations about that path we can make,
I agree. I obviously personally think that filters make sense when they are very clearly, when they're not going to be combined with policy attachment. If you're going to need to attach something, get more levels than a filter can support, you should just use a policy, in my opinion. But we should write that guidance up somewhere.
And
then I don't know if it helps or hurts, but some of the pushback I've gotten against that specific suggestion is that there's no way right now to attach a policy to a route rule. And so a filter is your only way to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a thing that could change. I know there's a proposal for that. The other thing is that I've been, yeah. But then the more we allow policy attachment to do, the more complex it can become, right? That's I'm very concerned about opening that can of worms too far.
Yeah.
So yeah, ideas welcome. Flynn, I appreciate you in particular for raising these issues. And you know, if you have any ways we can improve this, please, yeah, let us know.
Well, we could, I don't know, take over the
proposals.
API machinery group and change everything.
Yeah, I mean,
Might be slightly impractical.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has you know, the time to spend on that, I think it would be very welcome. I would really appreciate it. But yeah, I know it's, you know, multi-year effort. Cool. Okay, so that is yeah, we got a little off track, but I think that was a good discussion. Massive PR. Please take some time to review it. We are trying to get this in this week, which is not a lot of time. So really appreciate any time you
No
can
pressure, everybody.
to it. Yeah, no pressure. Next up, I just wanted to come back to this. I think we discussed this in the last meeting, but this is a PR that is attempting to resolve this partial validity. And the idea is that it actually allows two different ways to handle this state, which is a first in this API that I'm aware of. But it, I think, reflects the diversity of implementations that we have and the reality that not all implementations are, for example, stateful. So falling back to a previously known good state is not going to be straightforward for many. On the other hand, you know, so there's a lot to say here, but I think I've said most of it in the last meeting, so I won't reiterate here. I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on this one, so I expect it's just going to go in fairly soon. This is another one. When I keep on saying we're trying to get these things in this week, that's because we're trying to get them in so they can be reviewed by SIG Network API reviewers, basically starting at the end of the week when we hand it off to them. So yeah, this is another one that is in scope for the 1.0 milestone. If you have ideas, if you are uncomfortable with any of this, please you know, leave some feedback. Otherwise, I think this will merge in a couple days.
I was gonna say this week actually means the next couple of days, right? Because
well,
looking
yeah,
ahead at
I mean,
some of that SIG API stuff or SIG Networks API stuff.
Yeah. So there's a currently scheduled API review session where we usually introduce this to Tim, Cal, Zappa, etc. from SIG Network API reviewer level. It's been a pain to schedule, and I think it's still going to get moved one more time. There's a possibility that we can reuse next week's meeting slot for this, but I don't know yet. It's remarkably difficult to schedule anything that involves this many people that have this crazy of a calendar, but work in progress, especially when they all don't work at the same company, so you can't see everyone's calendar at the same time. But that's coming, currently scheduled for Thursday, but likely going to get pushed back a day or two still. So end of week is about as specific as I can get right now. And yeah, next one is this echoserver thing. I just wanted to highlight it. This is, I think, a really great effort. We have basically been keeping the ingress controller conformance repo alive just barely as we update the echoserver. You know, we had this idea, oh, why create our own echo server? We can use the one that already exists. And we just keep on making modifications. And it's gotten to the point where I don't know if anyone runs these tests anymore. And so we may have broken those tests for all we know with our changes. I don't think so, but like, you know, we might as well just bring it into Gateway API. And so that's what Simone is doing, which is great. I am not so. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this literally just moving it from the other repo, or do you know if there are changes as well?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's one change. Okay, so this came out of the timeouts implementation, conformance test specifically, and the Echo server did not have a way to add delay support, and I suggested, well, we should just add it, and maybe at the same time we could move it into Gateway API repo, and that's what this does. So the delay support is really, really simple. It's just the same query param delay X seconds. So I think there's nothing too crazy in here. Everything else is verbatim from the previous Echo server, but it does make that addition.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it does also, I think there's a thread somewhere here. This is going to have some kind of impact on the Echo server that is currently used for mesh testing that is coming in from Istio. And in that case, I think we're renaming both. So right now, the one coming from Istio, like copied over and then owned by Gateway, was just called Echo server. And now I think we're just going to have Echo Basic, which is this thing, and Echo Advanced, which is the Istio thing that does all the things possible. But yeah, that's about it. Cool. The last one, this is just a conformance test that I feel looks perfect to me, but I'm not, I would appreciate some other implementations running through this to confirm that this actually passes with them, or it's something that they can get to pass. We have this guidance in our API spec that says that every positive polarity condition needs to be set. So resolved refs, accepted and programmed when things are in a healthy state. This basically confirms that they're all set. I would appreciate people taking a look at this to make sure that, it either works with their implementation or has a path to working to their implementation, just so we don't end up with some unnecessary surprises here. It looks conceptually correct to me, but yeah, would appreciate some others taking a look. And that's all I've got. If anyone has anything else they want to discuss, by all means, we can discuss it now, or we can give people time back. Cool. Silence all around. I'll take it. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this earlier meeting time. I appreciate all the discussion feedback. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you either next meeting time or next month at the earlier time slot. All right. Have a great one. See you.